How to Bungle Your Jungle, a June Nash micro misadventure. Written by Melissa Bonzak, narrated by Cassandra Medcalf. For James, who would have started it all by asking, "What happened in Costa Rica?" Smooches to Mark. The story. A monkey was wearing my bra. Kind of. One sparkly blue strap was looped around its black furry thigh, and the other draped over its tan neck. The little menace had already ripped the padding out of the cups, both chewed up and spit out on my sleeping bag, right next to the little yellow puddle that rested on top of the waterproof fabric. I crouched in the opening of my tent and pried the sneaker off my left foot. Blast. This was only day 3. I was trapped on a 20-day shoot for my twin brother Dewey's TV show, Gone Herpin'. Maybe you've seen it? It's the #1 nature show on the Roar and Soar network. He's the host. I'm his personal assistant. I answer his fan mail, set up his appearance schedule, and run interference from his hardcore fans, the Doozers. I hadn't been doing any of that on this trip, though. Mostly, I'd been spending my time trying to steer clear of the hordes of creepy crawlies that littered every inch of this never-ending rainforest. For some reason, when Dewey'd mentioned Costa Rica, I'd pictured the beach. I really needed to pay better attention next time. Across the tent, the little monkey thief chittered at me. I took aim and tossed my shoe. And missed. The thief shrieked at the top of his lungs and raced straight at me. I threw my arms out as the monkey scrambled up my leg, and I barely got out a scream before it clutched a handful of my hair and swung itself Tarzan style through the open flap of my tent. I spun around, in time to see the thief leap onto a low-hanging tree branch, my sparkly blue bra and a few strands of my hair trailing after, as it disappeared into a green sea of leaves. "You shouldn't walk around without shoes." The camera guy, Eric, or maybe his name was Paul, had his rig pointed at my sock. "That monkey stole my bra!" The camera panned up my body until I could see my reflection in the lens. My long, curly hair, which is usually contained in a thick ponytail, was having one of those life-of-its-own moments. Thanks to a particularly humid few days, it was all frizz, frizz, and more frizz. "You're supposed to keep your tent zipped." It was zipped. I was pretty close to 53% sure that it had been zipped. My brother Dewey shouted, "Hey," to us from the far side of the camp, where he was examining something by his feet. Probably a creepy crawly. Eric or Paul scrambled over and dropped to a knee to get a good angle. I stayed where I was. Looking wasn't in my job description. After one more scan of the trees, I was never seeing that bra again. I tried to salvage my sleeping bag with a towel and a can of dry shampoo. "You missed the Bulletaglossa colonia." I glanced up at my brother and threw him a "darn it, I'll never forgive myself" look. Oh, shoot. Of course, I had no idea what whatever he'd said was supposed to be. Creepy crawlies were his thing. Watching over him was mine. "It's okay," he said. "There'll be more." Oh, joy. "Hey, I've heard that there's a coffee plantation that we need to see. You interested?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'd heard that Costa Rican coffee was a religious experience. Oh, yes, dear brother of mine. I was very interested in heavenly beans of caffeine. Hidalgo said that it was a not-to-miss spot. Chit, chit, chit. "There's this place not too far from it. Chit, chit, chit." Was that the little monkey thief? "And they have chit, chit, chit." While Dewey droned on, I squinted up at the trees and caught a glimpse of glittery blue through the green canopy. My bra! Yes! I cried out. "Huh, I didn't think you'd be interested. Fantastic." I dropped my eyes to Dewey's. Of course I'd want to visit a coffee plantation. He shifted his weight and crossed his arms. "I know that. It's the other place I was worried about. You really want to go there with me?" A test. I stood up and matched his stance. No way was I going to admit that I hadn't been listening. "Why would you think I wouldn't be interested? Run it by me again." He rolled his eyes. "Nice try, but you already said yes. Let's pack up and head out." I really think you should run it by me again." Don't worry, it'll be fun. Our ideas of fun rarely aligned. Once camp was stuffed back into the truck, I hopped in the rear seat, Eric or Paul got behind the wheel, and Dewey and our guide joined him in the front, riding double shotgun. How far away is the fun? I asked. Maybe I had time for a nap. There certainly wasn't much to look at. If you've seen one tree... It's close, my brother said. He signaled the camera guy who gunned the engine. 6 days later, we drove out of the jungle and arrived at a clearing that featured a rust-colored single-story house, aka the coffee plantation, that I was beginning to believe didn't really exist. It turns out that when Dewey said close, he'd meant as the crow flies. By truck, it ended up being about 50 miles, which might not have taken all that long if we'd actually gone directly there. Instead, we'd stopped. Often. And overnight. Eric or Paul shot a zillion videos of my brother interacting with creepy crawlies, and I'd nixed any attempts to include me by commenting with my angry finger. Please tell me we're eating lunch here. I was starving, and it felt like a zillion hours had passed since we'd had breakfast. I glanced down at my bare wrist. Yeah, my watch had vanished. I wasn't completely sure when I'd lost it. I'd had it when we'd arrived in Costa Rica. Chances were pretty good that the little monkey thief who'd stolen my bra had taken the watch, too. The front door to the rust-colored house flew open, and a group of folks spilled out into the paved circular driveway. Dewey met them halfway, and Eric or Paul got it all on video. There were lots of hugs, kisses on cheeks, and big, happy Spanish words tossed around. I said my hellos, then hung back, letting them get their fill of my brother. They seemed harmless, which wasn't always the case. If I had a shot of rum for every time security had escorted a doozer off our hotel balconies over the years, I'd never be sober. A little old lady who looked like she'd just fallen off a charm bracelet broke away from the crowd, tapped her arthritic hands together, and shouted something in Spanish. I watched everyone migrate toward a little fence, and I almost squealed with delight when I followed them through to a cozy courtyard. There in the center was a long table covered with food, and several carafes of coffee. I sat next to the one that smelled the best. Throughout the meal, Spanish ruled the conversation, and despite living 19 miles from the Mexican border, my skills to comprehend and reply in a coherent manner suck, unless I have a few shots in me. Since no one seemed all that interested in my opinions, I was happy just to stuff my face and pour a few cups of the best coffee I'd ever had down my throat. I was about to grab another refill when everyone stood and turned my way. Uh-oh. What had I done? You about ready? Dewey asked. Blast. I'd forgotten that I'd agreed to something. Play along or ask? I was still trying to decide when Eric or Paul saved me the trouble. The zipline, June? Remember? Dewey shot him a pissed-off look, and I smirked at my brother before turning to Eric or Paul. Of course. How could I forget? There was no way I was going ziplining. Why in the world would I hurl myself over the forest on a thin little coil of rope for no good reason? There had to be a way out. I glanced around the table at our hosts. The old couple probably wasn't interested in going. Ditto for the charm bracelet lady. That left 3 guys in their 30s, their wives, and 1 kid who looked about 10. Hey, where'd she come from? You know, I said, maybe this should just be a guy's trip. Dewey looked disappointed. He'd probably spent all day imagining me screaming in terror as I zipped over the rainforest. Everybody else nodded in agreement, except for one of the wives. She gave me that same look that the doozers do when I close off an autograph line at a book signing. I shrugged inwardly. She'd live, and now that I didn't have to go zipping, so would I. Everybody pushed back from the table. After a few hugs, kisses on cheeks, big happy words of Spanish, and an angry eyeful from that one wife, I was alone with a full carafe of coffee. And the little kid. So, she said in perfect English, what shall we do first? Blast. Somehow, I'd agreed to babysit. The kid, whose name was something that started with a Y, took me on a tour of the place, and for the next couple of hours, I was treated to a complete coffee education. How it grew, how it was harvested, how it was consumed. I nodded a lot and made the same affirmative grunts I make when Dewey goes on and on about reptiles. Much as I loved drinking coffee, I had little to no interest in hearing its origin story. By the time we ended up on a high hill overlooking a dense green valley below, my travel mug was empty, and I was in dire need of a bathroom. "There's bushes," the girl suggested. "Where?" I didn't see any, just a few trees, and they didn't scream squat here for privacy. "Follow the trail." Hey, there was a path. I really had to go, but kept my pace slow and my steps small and easy. The last thing I wanted to do was trip and have an accident in front of the kid. About halfway down, the path cut to the left, and I found myself face to face with the promised bushes. I did a quick check of the area. Nobody around. After I'd done my thing, and made use of a few of the leaves, I zipped my shorts and started back up the hill. And heard a giggle, somewhere just past the trees on my right. It was close, but not "I saw you pee and I'm laughing at you" close. "Hello?" "Senorita Nash!" Blast. It was the kid. I kicked up my speed and followed the direction of her voice, through the trees and out into a clearing. There she was, leaning against the curved side of what looked like an orange and yellow igloo with a tall chimney. As I got closer, I could see that the igloo was made of tile. Quite a few were chipped or had broken off, and the side closest to me had a warped wooden door. Whatever it was, it looked like it hadn't been used in quite a while. "Listen, I couldn't remember her name. Could I get away with calling her Small Child whose name starts with a Y? The girl put a finger to her lips and drummed the chimney with her fingertips. A soft rattle erupted from somewhere deep inside. Rattlesnakes? Were there rattlesnakes in Costa Rica? I ran the last few weeks over in my head. There'd been a lot of creepy crawlies. Had any of them been noisy? Yeah, quite a few. But had there been rattlesnakes? I couldn't remember. "Come away from there," I said. It was never a good idea to annoy things that rattled. The girl merely giggled and tapped the chimney again. And the rattlesnake rattled again. Though something about it didn't sound quite right. Maybe it was the pitch. I wasn't sure. Was this how Costa Rica rattlesnakes sounded? Before they bit small kids in your care? Blast. I really wanted to treat her to a few of my favorite words, but she was a kid, and I was trying to cut back. For Dewey's sake. The last thing he needed was one of his sister's profanity-laden tirades ending up on one of those tabloid TV shows. I snapped my fingers at her. "Really? Now, come away from there!" The girl continued to ignore me. She tapped the chimney one more time, and the rattlesnake rattled one more time. "Desmodus rotundus." I hated it when people threw scientific names at me. "What?" She repeated herself, dragging out each syllable. "Desmodus rotundus." Like that was going to help. "Lie down there," she pointed. Why? I had a bad feeling. She slammed a hand against the chimney. "What are you?" was all I got out before she grabbed the edge of the warped door. She was going to let it out. I needed to save her. I threw out my arms, hands grabbing at the kid's shirt, fabric slipping through my fingers as she flung the door open and then twisted away from me and dropped onto her back in the thick grass. The motion left me unbalanced, and I stumbled forward as a pitch-black tornado erupted from the igloo. Bats! The air buzzed with the sound of 1,000 wings, a few of my screams, and probably one or two of my favorite words, as the colony zoomed straight at my knees, raced up the front of my body, and zipped over my head, their claws dragging through my hair as the flying rodents turned their bodies skyward. And then it was over. The sky was blue again, and the only noise for miles was the grating giggles of a little kid whose name started with a Y. She laughed all the way back to the house, and kept giggling as she reenacted the story for her mother, and her father, and a dozen or so other people, including the wife who'd reluctantly stayed home. She got quite a kick out of it. I was out on the patio, drowning my sorrows in a carafe of coffee when the guys got back. "I hear you played with some vampire bats today," Dewey said. Blast. The girl hadn't left anybody out. "I hate you," I said. The sentiment was peppered with a few of my favorite words. Eric or Paul took the seat to my left. "It's too bad the kid didn't have a cell phone. You know how many hits you could have gotten on YouTube? You'd have gone viral." What a horrible thought. I shivered and took a sip of my coffee. "We could shoot a reenactment," he added. And choked. Dewey patted me on the back, and I glared at his soon-to-be ex camera guy. "For one of my don't try this at home segments?" Dewey asked. "I love it. We take her back out to the smoker," Eric or Paul started, "and tie it into the whole show on ecotourism," Dewey finished. Eric or Paul dug a notebook and pencil out of his backpack. "Tell me what thoughts were going through your head." I shook my angry finger in his face, and Dewey waved a dismissive hand my way. "Don't worry about her," he said. "We'll get a local to stand in as a clueless tourist." While they plotted the details, I excused myself and got the satellite phone from the truck. I dialed the switchboard for the jet my brother's production company lets him use. I'd had enough. I was going home early. And 12 days later, it arrived, just as scheduled. Apparently, unlimited use of the company jet really meant unlimited use for Dewey, the star of their show, not June, the star's unknown yet fed-up sister. No amount of begging, threatening to restrict my brother's personal appearances, or the liberal use of my favorite word convinced the mean lady on the other end of the phone to rescue me even 1 day sooner than scheduled. I rightly pouted for the week and a half it took for us to meander our way back to the rendezvous point, where, thankfully, the gorgeous jet was waiting for us. Dewey turned the truck keys over to our guide, and I beat the guys to the plane. I wanted first crack at the shower, which the flight attendant told me wasn't available until we were airborne and at our cruising speed. Blast. I dug through my suitcase and found the last clean clothes I owned and set them on a towel to hold my place. I was halfway through a bowl of hand wipes when Dewey dropped onto the couch beside me. "Best trip in ages," he said. "Right, Eric?" Blast. That was our camera guy's name. Eric, not Paul, took a spot at the table near the front and set to work fiddling with his camera equipment. "Did you have fun?" Dewey asked me. Was he pulling my leg? "I'm never going anywhere with you ever again," I said. "You're gonna miss this place." He threw an arm around my shoulder and squeezed. "You know you had a great time." I opened my mouth to tell him exactly what kind of time I'd had, but he held up a hand and dug his cell phone out of a pocket. "Cool. Wi-Fi's up, and I got a bunch of texts." Which meant I'd have a zillion as well. I decided to ignore them until we got home. The lights in the jet dimmed, and we started up what passed for a runway in the jungle. I leaned back in my seat to watch the edge of the rainforest roll by, and felt a pang of something. Uh-oh. Was Dewey right? Was I going to miss this place? I didn't want to miss this place. As we rose into the air, I caught a flash of sparkly blue in the leafy green canopy below. I sat up to stare down at the trees and could almost hear that little monkey thief chittering away at me. The pang returned, and then growled, which made me smile. I was hungry. And I really hated Costa Rica. The end. This has been How to Bungle Your Jungle, a June Nash micro misadventure. Written by Melissa Bonzak, narrated by Cassandra Medcalf. Copyright 2018 by Melissa Bonzak, production copyright 2024 by Melissa Bonzak. Want more June? She's back in a whole series of full-length misadventures, starting with How to Sex Your Snake. You can listen now on Audible, Spotify, YouTube, or any of your favorite audiobook listening platforms. Good adventures!